if he stops being at war, then his people are going to say, well, wait a second, what about all these problems we have at home? Who's responsible for them? And they've got a lot of problems at home. The average Russian is in really destitute poverty situation. And what Putin is most afraid of is for people to get mad at him. And so the best way for them not to be mad at him is to be mad at a foreign enemy. And so I don't see Putin anytime in the near term reintegrating into the West, because he needs foreign enemies to stay in power in Russia. And Putin understands very clearly, if he's not in power in Russia, all his money gets taken away, he goes to jail, and he probably gets killed. And so for him, all these wars are just a personal survival strategy.
Following 5 hours of talks between President Putin and US representatives last night, Russia has said that no compromise has been reached on a revised peace deal to end the war in Ukraine. Instead, Putin said Russia was ready to fight a war in Europe, revealing how little progress has been made towards peace. So let's get into the mindset of the Russian leader now with Sir Bill Browder, one of the staunchest, perhaps the staunchest of Kremlin critics and the author of Red Notice, How I Became Putin's Number One Enemy. Bill, welcome. Let's start with the headline in many of the morning papers. Putin claimed that Russia really doesn't want to fight Europe, but, and I quote, if Europe starts, we are ready right now. Given what he's had to expend already and what he'd stand to lose, how seriously should we take those words?
I think we should take them very seriously. We're in a situation in which Vladimir Putin, in order to stay in power, needs foreign enemies. He created this Ukrainian foreign enemy early on, and that's now been going on for many years. It's actually started in 2014. And he has been now moving on other countries. He sent in 16 attack drones into Poland, 3 fighter jets into Estonia. They're digging up internet cables in the Baltic. They're doing all sorts of nasty stuff. We're already at war with Russia. It's just a hybrid war. It's a plausibly deniable war, but we can't be sitting back and saying that's unrealistic. I think everybody who's in the defense business understands exactly how realistic that is, and it's potentially a very dangerous situation for all of us.
Well, with that in mind, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, they've walked away empty-handed. Has there ever been a Russian intention to settle this conflict, or has Putin simply been allowed to play the White House and the West? And if so, to what ends?
Well, so Putin has never had any intention of stopping the war, and he's been pretty clear about that. He has said that his objectives are completely maximal objectives. He wants to overtake Ukraine. He wants Ukraine to become part of Russia. He doesn't want it to be a sovereign state. and this whole peace negotiation, and I would put peace in quotation marks because it hasn't been a sincere negotiation. He has no intention of negotiating. He's doing this for one very, very important reason for himself, which is that he doesn't want any consequences to come from the Western world, from the United States, from the European Union, and so on. And the consequences he's most worried about are the oil sanctions. That Russia survives off of the sale of crude oil, mostly to China, India, and Turkey. The United States and other countries have threatened to impose crippling sanctions on those countries and those refineries if they were to continue to buy Russian oil. If that had happened, if those sanctions had been put in place, Russia would be potentially out of business in 6 months' time. And the other thing that Putin doesn't want to have happen is for Ukraine to get hold of the $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves, which are mostly frozen in Europe, some in the UK and other places. And so by dangling this carrot of a, quote, peace negotiation out there, he puts all of this stuff into the future, into the long grass. And so it's absolutely clear to me that the only reason that he's even entertained these, quote, peace negotiations is as a way of deferring these real economic consequences from the oil sanctions and from the frozen assets.
Right. I mean, I was interested in something that Michael Froman, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, said. He said it was in Putin's interest just to keep the process going, to have a long process of diplomatic engagement. But he made the point, and do you agree with him, that Putin's going to use these peace talks and drawn-out negotiations to kind of engineer a broader conversation about Russia's reintegration with the West?
Well, I think I agree that the purpose of these peace negotiations is to just draw out things. That's his main objective. He needs a long, quote, negotiation, even though he's not negotiating anything, just so that people like Donald Trump can say, listen, we can't be punishing Putin. We're in the middle of a peace negotiation. And you can't confiscate those frozen assets. They might need to be part of a peace negotiation. And so I think that Putin is just doing that. As far as reintegrating into the West, I don't think that Putin has really any intention of doing that at the moment, because he can't do that. In order to do that, he needs to stop being at war. If he stops being at war, then his people are going to say, well, wait a second, what about all these problems we have at home? Who's responsible for them? And they've got a lot of problems at home. The average Russian is in really destitute poverty situation. And what Putin is most afraid of is for people to get mad at him. And so the best way for them not to be mad at him is to be mad at a foreign enemy. And so I don't see Putin anytime in the near term reintegrating into the West, because he needs foreign enemies to stay in power in Russia. And Putin understands very clearly, if he's not in power in Russia, all his money gets taken away, he goes to jail, and he probably gets killed. And so for him, all these wars are just a personal survival strategy.
So you don't take seriously the sort of carrot dangling that was taking place a couple of weeks ago and the suggestion that there may be a route back to the G8 for Russia?
That is a total red herring, right? It's just so far out there. First of all, it's not going to happen. And secondly, it just doesn't, that's not what motivates Putin. What motivates Putin right now is staying alive. And to stay alive, he needs to stay in power. And to stay in power, he needs to be at war. That's all that motivates him.
Right. The Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has called on Putin today to end the bluster. Now, we'd like to think that he'd sit up in his seat and take notice. But frankly, does he care what we in Britain think or what we do?
Well, he cares about what we think and what we do if it affects his interests. And his interests are twofold. He doesn't want weapons being supplied to Ukraine, and he doesn't want sanctions being imposed on him to dry up his flow of money. We're not insignificant players in that. We're significant players, and we can have an impact on both those things. And for that, he does care.
One of the themes of today's programme is our relationship with the EU. European Union officials have drawn up a legal compromise to assure Belgium that it won't be left on the hook if 140 billion euros in Russian assets frozen in Brussels are used as a loan to Ukraine. Can you explain why this was necessary?
So when the war started, there were basically two main blocks of people supplying aid to Ukraine: the United States and the rest of the allies. And the rest of the allies are the European Union, the UK, Canada, etc. We were all, fully arm to arm on the side of Ukraine. Joe Biden, the former president, said, we're here as long as it takes. And then all of a sudden, power changed in America. The new president, Donald Trump, accused Ukrainians of ripping off America and did all sorts of other stuff. And as a result, he stopped the military aid to Ukraine. As a result of that, 40% of the military aid that used to go to Ukraine from the United States doesn't go to Ukraine. And so we're in a very precarious position right now, because as we supply the 60%, the Ukrainians need more than 60% in order to fight off the Russians. And so if we can't come up with a way for them to get more money, they could lose, and they might very well lose to the Russians. And if they lose, we got much, much bigger problems. And so we have to come up with the money. So there's two places that the money can come from. It can either come from the taxpayers. Rachel Reeves probably wouldn't be too happy about that. Or it can come from the $300 billion of frozen Russian, Vladimir Putin's frozen Russian central bank reserves.
Yeah, I think I know.
So it's sort of it's an obvious thing. We shouldn't pay for it. Putin should pay for it. And so it seems to me to absolutely be a certainty that that money will get confiscated, because if it doesn't, the consequences are even too hard to consider.
Right. But very briefly, Bill, one last question. You'll be aware of the things that the Prime Minister has been saying and about conversations around Brexit and closer realignment with Europe. To what extent would Putin care about Britain realigning itself with the EU, perhaps even opening the door to some sort of quasi-membership of it?
Well, so what Putin doesn't like more than anything are bodies of countries working together against him. He likes individual countries that are weak and he can bully, and he hates bodies like the European Union, he hates NATO, and anyone else who can stand up to him. He was very much in favor and very much supporting the Brexit situation because if the UK left Europe, it made Europe weaker or make UK weaker in terms of standing up to him. And so anything that would make Europe stronger, the UK stronger, and standing up to Putin is something that he wouldn't like.
That's great. Thanks very much for that. That's Sir Bill Browder, high-profile Kremlin critic, the author of Red Notice, How I Became Putin's #1 Enemy, with some really fascinating insight there. Thank you very much.